Fox News confirming that federal investigators have been monitoring Cohen's phone lines, but not recording the conversations. Joining me now to talk more about that, former U.S. Attorney and Avenue Strategies partner, Bud Cummins. Bud, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
Let's put the fake news of NBC on the side for a moment. And my question is, why were they monitoring his call log?
The pen register is basically a printout that looks a lot like your phone bill that we don't look at anymore because we all have unlimited calling, but that just shows every call that was made to and from and probably the length of the call. It's considered a lower level of intrusion and is not uncommon in the early stages of a lot of investigations, as opposed to a wiretap, which is considered an extremely highly intrusive tactic that requires a whole lot more proof and evidence before you get there.
Right. And I agree. I mean, initially I was completely outraged when I heard the news that he was being wiretapped because, again, it just indicates another abuse of power. But I still push back on that nothing was done here. The fact that they're monitoring the call log of the personal attorney of the President of the United States gives them an enormous window into the President's business.
Yes, it does. I mean, I continue to be concerned that they would go to the extreme of the search warrants that they executed if all they're looking at is based on some theory about campaign finance. I personally think that that's an absurd theory. I think the idea that there's a criminal issue there is absurd. If you look at the history of campaign finance, the few times anybody's tried to prosecute somebody on something, look at the John Edwards case. He was acquitted. There's a willfulness requirement for a criminal campaign finance violation that would be almost impossible to prove here. I don't think that anybody could try to suggest that if they did violate campaign finance law that it was willful and intentional. So if that's their basis, and I always withhold a little bit of judgment because you and I don't know what they know, and we don't know exactly what they're looking at. But if that's their basis, I'm highly concerned about it, and I don't think that they're doing the job properly.
But this is a basic question, legal question, Stegan McDowell. To get access to monitor a target's pen register, what do you have to get from a judge, if anything? Like, what kind of, if you're the investigator, where do you have to go to a judge? And also, what do you make of this ex-judge who's now in charge of combing through what was turned up in these raids on Michael Cohen's home, hotel room, and office in terms of trying to decide what is covered by attorney-client privilege?
Well, I think taking the pen register is a fairly administrative process, very easy to get, and it's not a high standard to get one. As far as the taint team process that the court created, I think that was a good step. They could have allowed the Department of Justice to create their own internal taint team. People are very skeptical about the integrity of those processes, and so it's much better to have an independent person sift through that stuff and decide what's in bounds and out of bounds.
Meanwhile, yesterday, New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, now the president's personal legal team leader, Rudy Giuliani, was here. He had some fighting words for the head of the DOJ and the former FBI director, Jim Comey. Listen to this, Bud.
When you look at the leaking by Comey, when you look at the invading of an attorney's office, when you look at putting out those 49 questions, the attorney general should step in and say, this is a disgraceful exercise in injustice, and therefore, as a Department of Justice, this investigation should be dismissed. They think the truth here is defined by James Comey. James Comey is the biggest liar of 2016, 2017. He and McCabe are pointing the finger at each other. One of them is lying. I kind of think it was Comey because McCabe went to him for permission for a leak. Comey had kind of opened the floodgates of the FBI. Every decent FBI agent has got to be embarrassed that he was their director. Any FBI agent who did that would have been fired and prosecuted.
What's your take, Bud?
Well, Mayor Giuliani is a fiery guy, but I basically agree with everything he said. Sadly, it would be difficult for an observer to look at the way Jim Comey handled the Hillary Clinton matter and then look at how he conducted himself with President Trump and conclude that he was acting, treating them both with the same kind of discretion or acting as a neutral party. And then when you get to McCabe, things get worse, and as you go down the line, things get worse with Strzok and Page. So I think Jim Comey, sadly, and by leaking confidential memos and now writing this book, I think his credibility is pretty well destroyed.
Yeah, which is why my instinct in hearing all of this, they recorded the call, the call log, is to push back and say, well, why? Because, I guess I've lost trust in the leadership of the FBI, knowing what we know about the text messages between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, knowing what we know about Andrew McCabe overseeing both investigations, a Trump investigation and a Hillary Clinton investigations, and the very different approach that they took, even though they had zero intelligence to even launch a probe over collusion between Trump and Russia.
Look, I'm part of a fraternity or a group of people that I'm very honored to be part of as a federal former prosecutor.
Sure.
And it's a group of politically appointed people and career people. And we collectively take a lot of pride in our ability to go and look in these difficult cases without fear or favor, do really hard investigatory work, and then make good decisions without listening to the noise, without listening to what the president tweets, without listening to Maria or Bud on TV. And I think Rod Rosenstein and Mr. Mueller are in that fraternity. What I fear, though, and this Rod Rosenstein's own words, the job is to determine what we can do, and then second, to determine what we should do. And that's the discretion piece. And it's important. And it doesn't mean don't investigate Hillary Clinton because you just don't want to. It means investigate the crud out of that case, but then make a sound decision by applying some reason to it.
Yeah.
And I fear that that's not happening here. If they are investigating, if they are just going and technically going as far as they can go without asking how far they should go, then they're not doing the job. And I wonder, as I hear about the profiles of the people on the Mueller team, who is in that room arguing that maybe they're going too far. Maybe they shouldn't be harassing a president of the United States that's trying to end a 65-year war in Korea or deal with China, who's trying to dominate us economically and militarily.
Right.
Who's in the room making those arguments? And I'm skeptical that there is a person in the room making that argument.
Yeah, and who would have looked at their boss and said, no, I'm not going to call it a matter. I'm going to call it what it is, a criminal investigation, as it relates to the Hillary Clinton investigation. Bud, you make a lot of good points, and we appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bud Cummins joining us there.